Okay. Let's kill the white pod here. Kenyatta. Video access. Here we go. Hang on a second. Okay, that's one hand. Video mode.
Oh, video mode. Okay. Oof.
There we go.
Interesting. We'll see what I look like. Oh, okay.
I'm sure you look beautiful. Well, did we lose you? All right, let's do that again. I think she signed out. Let's do that again. Hang on a second. All right, invite Kenyatta back.
I'm back. I'm sorry. Like someone like
That's okay.
Okay, you can
invite to video mode.
Okay. Here, I'll do accept.
Okay. There we go.
Here.
We're
all
good.
Right, sorry.
How you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining me today on this show, Rocstedi Podcast, episode 37 with Kenyatta Berry. I'm really looking forward to this talk. I'm really looking forward to finding out your specialty here and going to the depths of history, so to speak, of where we all come from.
Yeah, so I'm ready to dive in and answer any questions from the audience or anything like that. So,
absolutely. So I'll just start off by. So I'll just start by saying to the listeners, if anyone wants to actually chime in, leave any recorded messages for Kenyatta, there's a link on the fortune cookie if you're live here on Fireside, and that goes straight to my Instagram where you can leave that pre-recorded message and I'll play it during the show. So give Kenyatta a warm welcome if you can, and any questions are absolutely welcomed. So thank you for joining me. I'm excited about today. I've been looking forward to this for a while. We booked it a few weeks ago. I've listened to a couple of your talks. I'm really fascinated with this subject. So let's deep dive. All right. I want to start off a little bit first. Just tell us a little bit about genealogy and what you do specifically before I maybe want to go back to the start of your life and understand a little bit about who you are and how we got to where we are today. So if we could start there.
Yeah. So with genealogy, you're really trying to have a connection to your past, right? You're trying to understand your ancestors, find out more about your family history. Very popular hobby, I guess, in the US and has been around the world. And because of DNA, it's become more popular. So one of the things with genealogy is that it requires you to do a lot of research, a lot of documents, a lot of connections and connecting to people. And that's what I love about what I do.
So how did you get into this particular field in the first place?
I started when I was in law school.
I think we lost her. Did we just lose Kenyatta? Maybe. Can anyone hear me still? Okay, we lost Kenyatta. Let me bring her back up again. Here we go. Okay, we lost Kenyatta, but she'll be back. Here we go. She's back again. We've got no volume. We can't hear anything.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you now.
Okay, perfect. My apologies for the technical difficulties. So how I got started was actually I was in law school and I was dating a guy who had a very unusual middle name. And that middle name was the surname of his second great grandfather. And I thought, well, my family, they're very generic, so to speak. So I was like, oh, they don't have a great or interesting family history. But that last name was Dwelly. So I decided that I would research his family history. And that's what I did. And once I got into it, I became hooked because I was able to find his second great-grandfather that was enslaved. I was able to understand and let him know who his third great-grandparents were. Also, I got to think about someone that's been enslaved, right? It's like, just to even say that seems insane. So being able to look at him and say, I found this person, here's who his parents are, his birth date, and his family history, that really got me into it because I was able to share a story. And that's really like what I do, is about storytelling. And it's about sharing stories. You know, it's about helping people connect to their past and understand their past. And even though I didn't start with my own family, starting with him helped me appreciate how everyone has a different story. You know, how even if I thought, oh, my family, they're just farmers from Virginia, that's a boring thing, that actually matters. And so I really, really loved and enjoyed that experience. And I just got hooked. If you know any genealogists, you know, we just kind of become these, we kind of keep this stuff going. You know, we keep the documents, we keep everything alive, and we become the stewards of just the family history.
I think one thing that's disappointing is that it's only now, this day and age with technology, that we can go back and actually find where our history comes from like that with our genealogy. Also, people's life stories get lost. And again, you know, I'm just speaking with my father currently about a concept of interviewing elderly people towards the end of their life to capture their life story, because that's a whole generation of stories that'll get lost. What it was like 70, 80 years ago, what it was like to live, what it was like to do things. That's one particular element of it. But the other is the genealogy of where we stem from. I find that quite fascinating. I've actually done the DNA test about my history before with the genealogy on myheritage.com, I think it is. Okay. And I was really fascinated with the results myself. I'm from a real predominant Italian family, and from when I jumped onto the website and you try to trace back your history, I think I went to the 1700s and it stopped only on my father's side, and it was just all Italian. I was like, I must be 100% Italian here. You know, that's the initial thought that you think. But when you do the DNA test and it comes back, it blew my mind, and I started looking into it more. And this is probably about five years ago or so I've done this. And I'm actually quite a mix. I've still got the results here in front of me. I just wanted to bring it up real quick, but I'm about 80% European, around 10% Spanish, Portuguese. I'm about 11% African, and I'm about 6.5% Middle Eastern. So, and it's got a breakdown of that even more so. But I was like, wow, it really made me realize that a lot of these things that go on in the current day with these people fighting with racism and color and all this stuff is just null and void, because we are all everything, all of us. It just depends how much percent we've got, but that doesn't matter, because we all kind of stem from the same place. So I really want to ask your opinion, tracing back to what you're aware of some of the original origins and how we've come out to be where we are today.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing. People, when you do this research, you realize that what you've been told is a different story, right? That actually, oh, I'm 100% Italian, or I'm Irish, or I'm whatever. You find out that you're a mix, and that we should all know we're not that different. We all, you know, bleed the same blood, but for some reason, it's just these narratives that we've been given our entire lives that shape who we are. So diving into your genealogy changes that narrative. So you have to be ready to, I wouldn't say accept, or just be
embrace.
Open. Yeah, embrace. Thank you. Embrace a new narrative, right? And one company that I've tested with Ancestry, 23andMe, and then Family Tree DNA. And Family Tree DNA has done a lot on kind of just tracing us back to Africa, right? To the origin, to where we all started. And that's been very interesting, because they're the only consumer DNA company the only company that was started in 1999 to be a consumer DNA company, the only one. That was their whole goal, to help people, take their DNA test, do Y DNA tests, do mtDNA tests, do autosomal, all of that. That was their whole goal and their only business. The difference is when you think of an Ancestry, a 23andMe, or not 23andMe, but like an Ancestry, or even you said MyHeritage, they still have documents, right? So they are primarily a company around documents, but they have DNA as an option. Family Tree DNA was really focused on, you want to know who you are DNA-wise to connect to your homeland, right? To that place where your ancestors came from. Because at the end of the day, that's ultimately what we all want to do. We want to honor our ancestors. We want to figure out, we want to be able to say with pride and with certainty, I know my ancestors came from this place, basically, is what I'm saying.
You said something that's pretty interesting to me, is that we kind of all stem from Africa. I'd heard that before, but looking at more and more of these results from people, I really have found that, and my only conclusion is not a scientific one, it's just an observation, is that I think the more common DNA that is less in particular parts of the world kind of draws all to that one place. So I'm not wording that right. Basically, I'm like nearly 11% African, right? And a lot of people, seems like everyone's got a base of African in them. Now, obviously, if you're around Africa, you'll have higher amounts of DNA, but around the world, it doesn't matter how far stretched you are from Africa, you'll still have that there. So to me, that was common sense that we've based originally from somewhere there. Now, my wife's Thai, and I thought surely she wouldn't have African in her. Initially, before I looked all into this, she's got more African in her than me, and I was like, wow. So she's got African Spanish, she's got Scandinavian, and she's going, I'm 100% Thai, and it's not the case. I mean, she's predominantly Asian, but it's there, and it just starts to make you think about how everyone traveled the world and where it is and how we're connected. It's amazing. So what sort of understanding do you have about where we've originated in Africa? Is there any particular spot that they think that we've originally come from?
So one of the things what I like about Family Tree, or about a DNA piece is that it depends on your haplogroup, right? So you have to take a test. When you take a test at, like you said you did MyHeritage, right? So MyHeritage is going to tell you probably did an autosomal DNA test. That's going to be 50% from your mom, from your dad. You do a Y DNA test, is going to tell you your paternal side of the family, but you also are going to get your haplogroup from your paternal side and your maternal side of the family. Those are primarily are going to come from either 23andMe and Family Tree DNA. So with Family Tree DNA, they have actually created this community of people that are laser focused on surname studies, on haplogroup studies, and really just trying to kind of map these things out, and to figure out, to kind of answer the question, right? Is there an area? How can you understand or trace or get more information about where you originated, your ancestors originated? And one of the things that's unfortunate about Family Tree DNA, in my opinion, is that, they don't have the funds to be advertising on television, right? But they have the technology. I mean, I've been in their DNA lab in Houston. Like, they legit are the folks that, not saying that the other companies can't do this, but I've seen their work. So they are kind of the people to best answer these types of questions. And I've been to their conference. I spoke at their conference. These folks are really trying to get to the root of, who am I? Where do I come from? Where does my name originate from? All of that stuff. And why is it that my results are different than what I expected? And they're able to help kind of solve that, or answer that question, solve that problem. DNA is interesting because I feel like it's been popular, and we've had these kind of like pretty pictures and charts and things like that. But people don't understand there's a lot more that goes into it, right? You tested at MyHeritage. So let's say, for example, you and I might match as cousins, right? So the only way we would figure that out is if we tested at the same company. So I've tested at Ancestry, I tested it somewhere else. You wouldn't figure that stuff out. But that's the way in which you find how you're related to someone, right? Or your most recent common ancestor. So DNA is just like the first step. And oftentimes it requires additional information and digging to get to that origin story. And I have not personally, my name's Kenyatta. I was named after Jomo Kenyatta. I do not know if I have ancestors that are from Kenya. No clue. But that is the name that I carry. And my mother just decided to name me that. But my DNA doesn't reflect that. But also, that could just be because, we just don't know. And sometimes these DNA can't answer all questions, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay. We have a question from a listener, Chuck. I'm just going to play that for you right now. Okay. Here we go.
Hi, Kenyatta. It's cool to have you on Rocstedi's show tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing it. And this is same with Rocstedi. This is a fascinating topic to me. I've kind of been learning a fair amount about my own kind of genealogy over the past few years. But a friend of mine also had some rather interesting experiences with kind of discovering new family members that nobody knew existed. That kind of created some drama. So I'm looking at some of what you've done. I'm curious to kind of hear everything you have to say about these things. So looking forward to it.
Great.
Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, if any more questions, Chuck, go ahead and chime in again. That's great. So that one question I had too is that obviously, like, I'll use myself as the example. I try to trace back some family history. Got to about I think just after the mid 1700s, mm-hmm. and can't go back any further for me without going to use all the tools that are probably at hand, which I do want to ask you what they are. That's what this question is getting to. How would they find out more? I mean, obviously, I was lucky enough on one side of the family that people just had photos and information that would sprawl back to that far. Once that stops, how do people dig further to find that out?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. There's archives are essential in like helping people to find their ancestry, right? So you have and what I mean by archives, you have your state archives, your national archives, all of that. But you also have archives that are based on location, or that are regional. That's the word I was looking for. Regional archives that could really help you kind of get that information. What I would say to listeners is, if you've hit what we call a brick wall, if you've hit a brick wall, right? You've gone back this far, you can't go beyond that, is you have to think of different strategies. So maybe I haven't looked at every place. Sometimes it's an obscure library, it's an obscure manuscript collection, it's an obscure newspaper that may have information on your family or on that time period or during the time period that may help you actually find that information. But there's also, you have to make a plan like with anything else. A lot of times when we think about, I'm just going to go find my family, you may show up somewhere, you may think everything's online, it's not. And you think it's easy, but you have to have a plan to dig. And if you find a piece of information, what piece, how does that information kind of fit into the puzzle? right? Because genealogy for me, and one of the things I love about it, I mean, I'm an attorney by training. So like I love a good murder mystery. And one of the things I love about genealogy is it is solving a mystery. I am legit looking for dead people in my computer at 3 a.m. and trying to figure stuff out. Like that is, so, but if you're solving a mystery, you need to have a plan. You can't just show up, right? So I really think that one of the things is and you have to think out of the box. Everything is not going to be very obvious. And thinking out of the box means sometimes, you may know someone that lived next door to your grandmother that you think or that was her friend and you think they're not that important, but they are because they're part of her life. And maybe they went through things together that you don't know about, but her connection or their connection can lead you to a record that will help you find that person, right? Or find additional information. So we call it here, we say in the US, friends, associates, and neighbors. So the fan network. The fan network is extremely important because they will help you find the answer to any question.
Surely that only extends so far, though. That only extends a few generations, maybe at best, right?
Yeah.
How do they dig further than that? Besides, I mean, there would be some records, obviously, just before that people start to record, but how far back can we really go?
Okay, so then that also depends on, I mean, let's be honest, like we all know what we're living through right now. So how far back can we go depends on how many wars and destruction and of records that has happened, right? We can only go as far as the documents take us. I mean, that's really it. Because DNA, again, in my opinion, is, you can see a pretty, picture of sort of, where your ancestors came from, but the documents tell you the story. And we can only go as far back as those documents. But if there's been some conflict, some flood, some natural disaster that has wiped those documents out, we really can't go back any further than that. And that's a worldwide problem, and
sure.
You really, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic about it because the one thing we want to do is realistic. Yeah. One thing we want to do as genealogists is I always want to find the answer. I always want to tell you where you're, I want to give you that origin story, but I also know sometimes the documentation just isn't there. But that's why I say the archives, the libraries, like the, maybe the newspapers or just these obscure places may have some information that will help you find your ancestors. I mean, people should not give up, and they haven't for, they haven't given up, but just know that roadblock may exist due to something that was beyond everyone's control.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Kenyatta, we have a message from Deanna. She wants to ask you a question here. Here we go.
Sure.
Hey, Kenyatta. I've heard you a few times this past month, and it's so intriguing, the things that you are doing. And I had a really interesting experience when I visited Germany. My ancestry on my paternal side is from there, and we can go back pretty far. And the thing that was interesting is when we visited this town that was odd, you don't normally even visit it. It was called Buppard, and it's on the Rhine. And when I walked out and stood there, it just immediately I was overcome with emotion. And I'm just curious, what's your take on genetic memory? Have you had people have that type of experience? I found it very intriguing.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for the question. And yes, I've had that happen before, or people have had that experience. And genetic memory or trauma, or however you want to describe it, is a real thing. And it's something in you that, like it just comes out. It's so, I feel your question deeply because I've had it myself. Let me say that. So I know what it feels like. And, once you start doing this work, once you start researching your family history, you're going inevitably, I think you're going to get that. That's going to happen to you because you're connecting with folks that went through things that they survived so you could be here. And it's going to come up. We had it a lot when we were on Genealogy Roadshow, when folks would have questions about their ancestors, and we would tell them certain things, and you could see them visibly change in front of you. And you could see that they kind of were like, why am I having this experience right now? Why am I feeling this way when I didn't know this before I walked in here, 2 hours ago. Now all of a sudden I'm walking out a different person. And it's because your ancestors live within you. They come out when you least expect it. They are there. And that genetic memory or trauma, however you want to describe it, is prevalent, and it exists. Some people don't, they suppress it, but when you're researching your family, you embrace it. And so I think that's something that happens all the time.
Can I ask you something about that? Could that be more of a case, and just trying to think on it rather from an emotional perspective to a logical perspective? And I'm not saying that this is wrong in any way with the familiarity that happens, but could it be the recognition of familiarity because of the culture or the people that you've been around with your relatives, some sort of way that your makeup is, and when you're in these particular places that it hits home more, so it feels like you're having this emotional experience? Well, it is an emotional experience. However, more due to recognition without realizing it until that particular point?
Well, it could be. I think in some cases it could be, but I'll give you the example I have is that I grew up in Detroit. My mother, thanks. Holla for Detroit. But my grandmother, my mother were born in Detroit. My great grandmother was in upstate New York. So I was working for this company, at the time, technology company anyway. So they were moving a company to Maryland. And out of all the people they moved from Detroit to, the employees they moved from Detroit to the Maryland, DC area, I was the only person that chose Virginia. My folks were enslaved in Virginia. I didn't know that at the time. So there was a reason why I was in Virginia, because my folks were saying, come home. So sometimes it may seem like, oh, this is from, it was exactly weird to me because, that extended my commute. Like, why would I choose Virginia? I had never been there. It made it.
Sure.
It'd be easy.
I totally value that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm also thinking that the recognition of the calling of knowing that you're from there would connect you more, right? So you would feel like that's the right decision. Had you had not chosen that and found out some other information in other places, do you think you'd have somewhat of a similar feeling?
No, I don't think so, because, it's with that situation. No, I don't think I would have, because sometimes some people do say, okay, I'm going to go back here because my family was here, and that's fine. But I think with the question with Deanna was more about that. It's sort of that gut emotional type of I don't know why I feel this way, but I know I'm feeling this way because it's not just me. It's people that were here before me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I can totally recognize that in myself before. I haven't traveled to Italy, right? And I know predominantly being Italian, that I already anticipate that feeling exactly what you're talking about. Going there, that recognition, I think being a little bit more familiar with it, though, in my family home life here, eating Italian food, doing Italian things and hearing grandparents speak Italian, that it would hit even harder with that feeling that you're talking about right now. But you're talking about not even experiencing it before and going there, then it still impacting you as well, as though you've hit home without realizing that this was where you're from before.
Mm-hmm. That's what you're talking about. I was home before I even knew I was home.
Sure.
I mean, that's the thing, you know, and one of the experiences I had was when I lived in Virginia. My folks were from Central Virginia near the presidential plantations, and I drove to the place where my fourth great-grandfather lived in 1870. And like, I took the route from, you know, one county to the other, you know, where they migrated. And it's a different feeling. It's a different feeling because it's like you're standing with them. I mean, I just can't even talking to you about it now, I'm getting goosebumps because I remember it so much. I wrote about it in my book because it was life-changing for me. Absolutely. To be able to do that. And someone can say, oh, you know, you're Irish or you're this or that, and you haven't grown up in that culture, or you get it on a DNA test. But when you actually physically go to a location, when you stand where you know someone that your ancestors stood, it's just a different feeling. And maybe even, you know, if you know, like I didn't know when I moved to Virginia, as I said, that was my folks' origin, especially where I lived. Then it was, you just kind of become drawn to it.
Beautiful. We have about 4 questions for you here, so let's knock them out. Right, we've got 2 from Chuck, 1 from Joy, 1 from Diana. So here we go.
So talking about you're kind of mix not being what you expected. I went through and I did the 23andMe test, and my sister did, and my dad did too. My mom, she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. And I eventually kind of figured out, because I'm a quarter Sicilian. She's half. My grandfather was full-blooded Sicilian, to the best that we knew. And, but you know, I think she was somewhere kind of worried that she might find out that maybe she wasn't actually Italian, and had kind of built so much of her own personal identity around that. And she wouldn't take it, you know, and I was like, okay, that's fine. You don't want to, that's fine. I get it. You know, you want to give someone else your DNA, that's fine. But, you know, and, but it was an interesting, kind of premise, you know, and it turns out that's not the case, because, you know, I showed her mine. I was like, look, this.
Another message to follow that. Hang on.
Yeah, sorry. You know, I was like, no, look, this confirms I'm like almost exactly 25% Sicilian, like specifically Sicilian. So that lines up with everything we know from the family. So you don't have to worry about that. But there's kind of an inherent fear that maybe it's not what she thought, and was, you know, could be crushing to this identity that was built. It's an interesting scenario.
Yeah, it is. I mean, people build. Yeah, I mean, they just, again, to mention the show that I was on, people have this identity, whether it is around I'm, you know, Italian, I'm Native American, or this story, that story. And when you challenge that through a DNA test or something else like that, then, or through documents, then people, you know, become concerned, because then who are they? Like, how do I identify now that you've broken, or there's a crack in sort of the like fabric of who I am, or the foundation of who I am? And that becomes very difficult. And that's one of the things I just want to make sure people understand. Like, when you're doing DNA, when you're deciding to do this type of research, just make sure you're ready for these types of things, because not everybody is able to deal with it.
interesting that you say that, and it's a question I had further up the track here on this show for you about the identity. But I also, when it came to my wife, when I was taking the DNA test, she did not want to take it either. She absolutely did not want to take it. So I just did my son instead and got my results and my son's results to find out what she was. And, you know, and I mean, it wouldn't be specific. I mean, it would be specific, I guess. I was just trying to break it down to my best knowledge with the maths to figure out what she was. And that's how I found out that she had this in her blood too, but she still denies it. She somehow still denies it. But I think the identity thing is really attached. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know how people can deny it. And some people will say, they'll say that it's made up, but they're not looking at pictures of us or what we look like. They're taking a swab on a cotton bud and telling us what we are from the DNA structure, right? And they couldn't guess it if they tried. There's no way they could guess it if they tried, you know, to get so accurate with understanding where we're from. Okay, we've got we've got 2 messages from Joey and 1 from Deanna. Here we go.
Hello, Rock, my brother. Kenyatta, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on my buddy's show. I'm looking forward to this talk. Rock forgot to leave. He left out that he's actually part handsome as well. But I have an interesting kind of thing with my family. On my dad's side, his grandfather, you know, came here from Sicily, but he was an orphan. And like my last name is one of a kind. Like if you know anybody with my last name, we're related because it was like given to him. Because I growing up around other Sicilian and Italian people, they were always like, Pelleoni, what is that? Well, where does that come from? I'm like, I don't know. But tracing back to my roots, like, I don't know how you would get past in a family tree that part of it. Like, can you give me a little bit of insight on that possibility, like how that would work?
Good question, Joey.
So for Italian genealogy, actually one of my favorite, one of the sites I use a lot is Familysearch.org. They have a wiki that wherever, you know, your ancestor is from, as orphan, that they would let you know what records are available, and how to actually contact the churches. I believe a lot of church records are what folks use for that type of research. So I would do familysearch.org, the wiki, understand a location, right? Know more or learn more about their location as well. And that would be the start. There's also a lot of Italian genealogy societies. I do not know for sure if Ancestry has, I don't think they do have a lot of records for Italian genealogy. So I wouldn't probably suggest that, but definitely start with Family Search. And once you start digging, then you'll realize, the other thing is with the area where your family is from, there may be some local like archives or societies that have digitized and indexed records that are just related to that area that a small group of people kind of know about. So understand that area, and then you can find more records there. And I always think newspapers are like a great resource just to understand the history. When you're doing genealogy, you need to understand the history of the place you're researching because that impacts everything, right? You know, if someone, why was this person on an orphan train? Why did this happen to them, right? What was going on at that time? So that's also very important because doing genealogy means history.
Okay. We got another message from Joey.
Oh, nice. I'm from the Detroit area,
nice.
Just outside of the city. Detroit proper, if you will. But do you think that because we're both from Detroit that we are related?
I would I know. I would need more information, okay, to figure that out.
Okay. We've got another message from Diana.
The interesting thing is that I don't know that I'm from this particular town. As a matter of fact, I was on a trip with friends that picked this town. And I didn't know the grandmother, the great-grandmother. I didn't know her. She passed before I was born. But I do have some stories that she grew up on the Rhine. Don't have the ancestry. It was just the strangest connection. It wasn't sad. It was just overcome. That's all.
Interesting. No, thank you for that, Dan. I appreciate that. All right, we've got a couple more coming in. They're coming in hot for you, Kenyatta. So if you don't mind taking these, we'll go for them. Here we go. We've got Chuck.
So getting off the DNA testing for a minute, you'd spoken some about tracing back slavery history and genealogy there, and obviously you have your limitations because there's only so far you can go, and you quickly hit a wall with just lack of documents, documentation. And that's also the case with Native American history in the United States. There's very, very quickly you don't have documents and records, and so how do you proceed there? How do you keep going when what kind of resources do you try to dig into? Do you try to dig into tribal history and with African slaves or with Native Americans, and how do you dig beyond documents? Where do you go from there? Because that's a real limitation.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. I'll tackle the Native American Indian question first. There are documents, there are resources, and you're really going to have to go to governmental documents, right? So the Library of Congress, you're going to have to understand treaties that we engaged in or signed or whatever. You really have to understand the laws that are related to that, and removal of the American Indians from their land, the Trail of Tears, those documents or that process, and then documents that are also in Oklahoma that are related to the various tribes. There's going to be the 5, they call them 5 civilized tribes, which is not what we want to call them, but that's what they're known as. There are going to be documents related to that, but there are over 590-ish, probably more now. I talk about it in my book, tribes that are federally, recognized in the U.S. And those records are where you're really going to try to see if they have records, because they do, but also universities and universities and kind of archives are going to be the place to go for that. The thing when it comes to enslaved genealogy is same thing. There are records, but those records are going to be related to the person that enslaved someone. So if your ancestor was enslaved or was an enslaver, there will be records related to that because these folks were property. So they had insurance on them. They were selling them down the river. They were shipping in places. They were in wills. So all of those documents are available. It's just the process of looking for them is tricky because you need to know the name of the last enslaver, understand the county, the history of the state you're researching, and the laws related to that. So when it comes down to it, one of the things I did not expect when I got into genealogy, when I started in law school, is that my law degree actually helps, right? Because most people are like, oh, you're a lawyer. Why are you not practicing law? I'm like, oh, because now I realize understanding the laws helps me find this information.
Sure.
Because everything's related
to it. What a handy tool. What an absolute handy tool for this. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. We have a few coming in here for you, Kenyatta. We've got Real Skinny coming up. I believe he's actually got Native American blood in him too. So let's see what he's got to say. He might be answering something like that.
Hey, yo, Rock, I just wanted to jump in here and say great show, man. I was here at the beginning. I was here way before it started. Actually, a little too early, I'm supposing. But anyway, I got called out to another show on Fireside, which was really cool. And I was in another show prior to that here on Fireside. So trying to get Fireside famous. And but following your advice and submitted another thing about being a content creator.
That's good. That's good, Skinny. Thank you. Got one more. I didn't know if that was related to the show. Here we go.
Oh, and I'd be careful, Rock, about letting.
Okay, here we go. I think he was sending that personally instead, but we've got one from Joey here. Here we go.
Sorry, yeah, I was joking around. I'm just being silly. But thank you very much. No, yeah, he was my dad's grandfather, like the nuns. He was like, that's who took care of my dad's grandfather. So the monastery, that's probably be what, or because it was Palermo where the church was. I'm thinking like this, and I don't mean to sound like I'm like, what if it was probably something like, maybe it was like a young girl that got pregnant, or like maybe a prostitute or something like that. You know what I mean? I didn't know. I didn't want to say that. It sounded like a jerk, but I was thinking that.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's so many different, I mean, if it's Palermo, there's different resources, especially, you know, in the U.S., there's so many different like resources for Italian genealogy. I know there were 3 of us that were hosts on this genealogy roadshow, and Mary, she focused primarily on Italian genealogy. So Mary Tedesco. And like, that was one of the things when anything came up, when someone came and had a question about, you know, somebody was left at the steps of the church or something, she was the one to kind of focus on that research. So I do know it's possible to find that information, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it was something so, you know, nefarious or tragic. But you can find that. So again, Familysearch.org, their wiki would be a great resource.
Kenyatta, how long have you been doing this for?
I've been doing it for like over 20 years. So I've been primarily focused on, genealogy for 20 years, enslaved genealogy in the U.S. But my book is just kind of a beginner's guide to doing genealogy. And I mean, I love it because I think everyone wants to know, well, not everyone, but I think some people have a general curiosity about like where did they come from? You know, who are their ancestors beyond just what you've been told or what you've seen.
100%. It's a fascination for me, and I'm sure that's why the listeners are here to listen to you today. Now, first of all, let's give your book a quick plug, which we'll do again at the end, but I do have a question for you. So what was your book?
The Family Tree Toolkit came out in November of 2018. It's a beginner's guide on how to research your family history. I kind of wrote it as if it was something I wrote it because it was something I would have wanted 20 plus years ago. I do a little bit outside of the U.S. Or give resources outside of the U.S. as well. I talk about DNA, adoption, telling family stories, what to do, how to interview people. I give sample questions and all of that stuff in there as well.
You've been doing this for a long time. You must have come across some wonderful, beautiful, unbelievable stories. What are one or two of those that really stand out? I want to hear. I know I've listened to a couple of your shows, but I want you to pick what you think has been profound for you to come across for clients or people that you've helped along the way in this particular field.
There are a lot of stories. That one of the things that there's so many stories, so little time. So that's first.
I'm sure that they're owed a lot more time than what you can probably talk about them for, but just to brush over a couple, Yeah,
sure, for sure. I think that impacted me. I don't talk about it a lot because there's a story that I did on Genealogy Roadshow with Gail Lukasik, and she was on my show on Fireside, and, her mom passed for white. She was born in Louisiana. So that's like if you think of my most popular story, it's Gail Lukasik. Gail's mom passed for white, moved to Ohio. Gail realized, just curiosity, doing her family history, saw her grandfather, excuse me. I think it was her grandfather listed in a census record with Black next to his, as described as his race. And then, kind of continue that research. When she was in the library at that time, or the family history center, or wherever she was, the person who was working there used a derogatory term. And so Gail just kind of left, but she went to her mom and said, is this true? Is this and her mother denied it because her father didn't know. So this woman literally took on an entirely different identity and married this white man that didn't even, he just didn't know. And so I can't even imagine the fear that she lived in. But with Gail, she found that information or found that out, and she was able to then meet her, family members that she didn't know. So that was a really touching story because she held that secret for so long because her mother was embarrassed by it. And as a Black woman, to reveal to someone and to hear someone, be embarrassed for, or ashamed, I should say, of being who they are was a very interesting experience for me. So that story with Gail was big. And
I caught some of that too, by the way, that time you did the story here on Fireside, and it was fascinating. It was really early in the morning for me, 4 a.m, I think, but yeah. I was catching parts of that story, and it was fascinating. Now, some questions just for the listeners to clarify, and also me a little bit, because I couldn't chime in that day because it was early, is that obviously Gail looked like a white woman of appearance, and her mum didn't.
No, her mother did. Her mother did.
Yeah, so her mum did, yep. But then so Gail's father, who was white, didn't interact or meet his wife's parents or anything like that? How did that happen? I'm kind of curious on how that broke down.
Yeah. So from what I understand, that, she left Louisiana and she went to Ohio. And yeah, it may seem to you well, how is it that you're married to someone you can't meet their parents?
Sure.
How's that? But when you decide to pass, when you're a person who, and again, or not again, I should say, because the listeners probably don't know, but when you are, we come in all shades as Black folks in America. So, I have photos of my grandmother was very fair skinned. My great grandmother was very fair skinned. I have cousins that could pass for being white. So when you decide to do that, that's it. We just let you go. We don't say anything. We don't come around, and you do what you're going to do. And that's what happened. So her parents, Gail's grandparents, had gotten divorced when her mother was young, 6, and the father got remarried. That's a story to be able to oh, my parents were divorced, right? When her grandfather remarried, he had 4 additional children. When she came on the show, legit, I was these are the 4 aunts and uncles you never knew, and cousins you never knew because of that. And they had heard about her mom. They knew she existed. But yeah, some people, it happens because once you make that decision, everyone knows you made that decision. And what we're not going to do is out you for making that decision. That's
a hard concept for me to understand from Australia, that goes on and did go on over in America. I'm sure it happened in places around the world, but with my current generation and with my location, that's a hard concept for me to grasp, that people did that. They were ashamed about who they were, and the family understood that to be quiet and let them go to so-called have a better life, when life should have just been good across the board anyway. And I can see that you have this drive to help people find their find their families from the days of slavery, right? From experience through what the black community's experienced over there. I'm not anyone to comment. I just don't understand it enough in Australia. But these are the conversations I love to have to educate and understand for myself and other people from around the world what don't quite understand what happens in America. So it sounds like you've been helping a lot of people along the way. And what was your particular drive to want to help that specific stream within the genealogy for African Americans?
Because it's complex and it's hard and it's tough. And one of the things about being a lawyer is that you're taught to remove emotion from a situation. And you are really, and that helps me with the work. But I want to give these folks voices. You know, you asked me about stories and I got into Gail and she always like sidetracks me and I know we're probably at time. But one of the other stories I did that was really important and definitely not easy was a lynching of a family that literally just left South Carolina. And they were like, how did we get to Philadelphia? How do you tell someone that their ancestor was lynched, that they were murdered? And that no one was tried for that. Like there was no criminal thing going on, you know? So I just really want to try to help people find some type of peace because there's that, I wouldn't call it uneasiness, but things have happened. And in doing this research, you just help people really connect to those folks that have gone through that trauma. And I decided to do that because I feel it's important. And I know it's hard work. And I know it's not easy. And not everybody can do it. And I didn't choose this work. This work chose me.
Kenyatta, if you don't mind, let's go back a little bit about who you are, what your childhood was like as a little girl. I want to know a little bit about how you grew up. Are you able to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Detroit. I grew up as an only child, very even though I grew up in the inner city in Detroit, I was very sheltered. I had a wonderful childhood. My parents were very young not very young. I mean, my mom was like 19. My dad was 21. They didn't stay together, but that did not impact sort of my childhood in a negative way. My dad was always in my life. I was pretty much a nerd. That's really what I did. I read a lot. My mother made me do book reports during the summer, which I thought everybody did, but apparently that wasn't the case. I was like, what? So yeah. So I pretty much had like this very kind of sheltered childhood. And I was just taught from age of 3, you're going to go to college. Like, that's it. Like, you're going to school. And, I went to, I guess I call it magnet high school, whatever, but I majored in high school. We had majors. I majored in business, and then I went to Michigan State after that, and then decided to go to law school. I never really wanted to be a lawyer, decided to be a lawyer, but that's what I did. So my childhood was it was great. I mean, there's nothing negative I can say about it. And I never really had I would say an interest in genealogy or family history when I was younger, but it was kind of once I got older, that became something.
So the positivity is a good thing. I'm never looking for all negative stuff. I'm just curious about people's lives. But what I am trying to find is the drive that comes in you to want to help other people in finding the history like this. So where did that stem from?
Okay, so I think here's the thing about growing up an only child. You have siblings?
I do.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if you
beat them up all the time.
So when you grow up an only child, you don't have a friend base. You have to legit go out and be like, I need to find friends. I need to get people to like me. And not in a way in which I'm saying it's like an insecurity, but you have to you just have to kind of network and work. As my mother said to me the other day, you got to work the room. And I've been working the room since I was like 5 years old. I mean, that's the thing. So if I've been working the room since I was 5, I listen a lot. I listen to people's issues and problems and other things. And people want to tell me that stuff because of that, right? Because I listen to them. So that comes from a childhood of being an only child. You have to make friends. And in doing this work, and the drive to do this work is people send me stuff all the time that's very near and dear to them. And I listen to them, and they can see that, whether they see that from seeing me, on Genealogy Roadshow or reading something where I'm quoted. So it's, I want to help people because I know what it feels like to be alone, or what it feels like to want to have an answer to a question. And I have the time. I make the time. Let me say that. I make the time.
That's just really fascinating. I like that. So do you specify, do you work with anybody, or is it a specific field? Like, obviously, there's some stories coming up about people tracing back to the enslaved ancestors. Is that something you specify in particularly more so, or do you just do a whole broad range for anyone? I mean, if I was to put my hand up here in Australia, would you be able to help me in that sense? I'm not that I'm asking that, but I'm just out of curiosity asking, how far does that stretch with your skills and knowledge and tools of what you've got at hand?
Yeah, I focus primarily on enslaved genealogy in the U.S., but I do help folks, kind of around the world. I would say that my sweet spot, though, is definitely enslaved genealogy. Now, I am past president of the Association of Professional Genealogists, which is a nonprofit group with, I think, about 3,000 members around the world. I could always refer people. As I said, my book is very general, even though it's primarily U.S. focused. But as general as far as like a beginner's guide. But I tend to focus on what I stay in my lane of enslaved ancestral genealogy because I know it's tough for people to talk about it. It's tough for people to research it and look at it. And I am always willing, if anyone listening is interested, they want to learn more about their ancestry, I can definitely recommend people. I do take clients, but when people come to me, it's generally when they have been researching for 30 years and they're like, I've hit this roadblock. I can't find this person. They're not just starting off. They're like, they've been knee deep in it and it's hit that point.
What does it take for someone to want to come forward and start this whole process looking for their ancestors? Is it an easy process? Is it an expensive process? Is it a time-consuming process?
Yes, it's very time-consuming. Start because I'm like, I've been searching my family for 20 plus years. Yes, it is. But I would suggest to anyone looking to hire a genealogist to really, have an objective, right? Don't just say, oh, trace my family back as far as you can. What are you trying to figure out? What's the goal of your research? All of that good stuff. That would be my first thing. And then it's expensive, depends on who you hire, right? And the availability, of records. So if the person has to we're not too many people are traveling, but if the record set is not available, or if they have to, translate stuff, all of that calculates into the fee of the research. And make sure that you have a contract. You all agree on what your goals are in this research and do that first. But I will say this, don't expect, if you hire someone, don't expect them to find the information in like 3 months, because it just doesn't work that way. We're all juggling a bunch of stuff. We're juggling multiple clients. We're doing all this stuff. So while your project is very important to you and it's important to us, to the researcher as well, it's not the only one we're working on.
Where can we find your book, Kenyatta? If people were to reach out to buy your book, where would they be able to find it?
So you can find it at Amazon, and as well as like your independent bookstores, but Amazon.com, and also on Skyhorse Publishing website.
Okay, cool. I want to know if there's something you want to leave with the listeners, an important message from the things that you found and the things that you've discovered. If you had to let everyone know something special, what would it be? Or something important, what would it be?
Everyone has a legacy. Everyone has a story. And I think we all have a story worth sharing. And because our ancestors went through whatever they went through for us to be here, that we really should tell their story. And the words are not coming out the way I want them to, but basically I'm saying, like, you know, just know that you can be a steward of your ancestors' legacy and story and strength and resilience. And that is important. And that no matter what, whatever day you're having, whatever thing that's going on, I mean, we can't deny the fact that we're all on edge right now, no matter where you are. But just know that your ancestors are there and their strength lives in you, and you can tell their story through your words and through your research.
I just want to add to that a little bit. So, you know, obviously there's situations going on with like what's going on with Russia and Ukraine right now, and these big fights and people with war around the world, when really, if everyone just went out and did one of these DNA tests, we would find that we're so connected as people. All this hate and bullshit that goes on is just so shallow. You know, I urge people to go and do these particular tests, try and find a little bit about your heritage, and see that our seeds have been spread wide across the world. That's how connected we all really are. And all this stuff of hate and rubbish can just fucking drop, because I'm sick of it personally. I don't look at the world in that way. And when I see all this going on, it's disgusting to me. And especially in this current day and age when we're a lot more wiser, we've got the wisdom behind us of the history that's happened. It just shouldn't even be a thing in 2022. You know, that's my opinion. So I just want to add that in there if that was okay. But Kenyatta, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been super interesting talking to you. I'm going to do a little bit more of a deep dive on my own family from what you've said as well. And, you know, I just appreciate your time coming forward to share these stories with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. And thanks to everyone that stayed and listened.
Not a problem. Thank you so much. Have a great day ahead. Everyone give Kenyatta a follow here on Fireside. She's doing some great things. She's got some great stories. I have caught a couple of them. So I'm looking forward to what you've got in the future.
All right. Yeah. A lot going on. So, all right. Take care.
Thank you so much. Well, did you have anything you want to drop that's going on at the moment?
Well, I'm working on my second book. So stay tuned for that. And then my show is on Fireside is Finding My Family. And so I'm going to be doing something hopefully in the next couple of weeks with that as well.
Awesome. I'll be there. I'll be your #1 fan. I'm going to be looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you, Kenyatta. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining the show. Cheers. Okay. Waitbot, where are you?